G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and this is a video tutorial on basic painting in Adobe Photoshop. This is a video which is part of several videos which is part of a painting in Photoshop tutorial set. So if you want to check out the whole set, you can click the link on the left, the annotation on the left, or if you're watching it on a device, you can find the link in the description. Or if instead of going through all the tutorial nitty-gritties and watching me talk and get bored, you can watch the whole thing be sped super fast, just to about a couple of minutes long, by clicking the link on the right to view the finished product, or the link in the description. Getting straight to it, we're taking off where we left off in the clipping mask tutorial, where we've set up a few layers here. So we have our skin clipping mask layer ready to go, our shirt, our other, and our hair. And on the very top, I have my line work overlay, which I'm keeping it to a really low opacity so it doesn't intrude with the work I'm about to get going. So the first things first, I'm going to get the shading down. Now I showed how to use clipping masks in the clipping mask tutorial, so make sure to check out that, because I'm not going to re-explain everything in every video I do. So I'm going to select my mid-tone that I have for the skin here, and I'm going to put that in my color palette on the right by just clicking there with the color selected, and I'll just hit OK. So there we have my skin color, and I'm going to add a couple more. So I'm going to bring up the color to add a little more yellow, make it lighter, and hit OK, and then put that over there on my swatches. And I'm going to make a dark tone by bringing it down to more of a brown and bringing the shader to a little more red. Hit OK and paste that there. So I have my mid-tone, my light, and my dark. So the first thing I do is I select my brush, and this is just for the skin, so I'm only working with the skin at the moment. I bring my brush size up to, let's say about that big. It's got to be quite large. I bring the hardness all the way down, and I bring the opacity, I'm not quite sure how to say that, to around 10, so really low, and I'm basically tapping through and starting to add the shade. Now I'm doing this in broad areas. We add extra detail later, and I'll bring down the line work just so I can see the shading I'm doing more. I just want to have a rough guide as to where the lighting is going. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going to get ready to make sure that the nose shows well. Now as you can see, with the line work hidden, this is all just one flat color. Now I need to be able to make some parts of the face emerge in front of others. So in particular, the nose is a very obvious one because his head's turned. We need to show a definitive line where the nose is. So if I shade a little bit darker just behind the nose, then I get my eraser. I can erase the area at the edge of the nose. And what that does is it creates a distinct hard edge. Then I erase the other side of the shading there. And if I hide my line work, we can see there that that's where a nose goes. So I bring my line work back, and now I can do that in other parts of the face. So for example, behind here, I want there to be darkness behind here because he's a bit of an older dude. He wants a shadow on this line wrinkle thingy there. Then I get my eraser and erase where the nostril is because that's in front of that, and erase along that wrinkle. Okay, and so by doing that, it allows me to build up layers of shade. So I'll erase the rest of that, and now we have a bunch of dark areas with some hard lines. Okay, I'll do the same over here. So I want to build up the cheekbone. So I'll make my eraser a bit bigger, and I'll erase a hard edge like this. Okay, and we use this minimally. We don't want to overdo it. I'm going to bring my brush size down, bring my opacity down a little bit, and then I'm going to go through and add the rest of the basic depth and shading for the character. So I can go back to the nose and add the edge, the side, under the eye. It gets nice and dark. Now, keep your strokes fairly broad, make sure the opacity is low. We're not refining yet, so it can look a bit scraggly, it can look a little bit, you know, a bit too broad in its shading, but that's absolutely fine. because we just want to make sure that we're starting to refine and outline the shape of the face. So we don't need to get too picky yet. So the underside of the nose, underside of the lip. I'm going to do the same thing here with the lip. Erase the top bit so that I can see that there's a hard edge on the lip where the shadow is underneath, and then I can just go across and paint over that. Okay. Same thing with the ear. In fact, I'll just go add a whole bunch there and then erase my edges there, and then add more shading. Okay, and finally in the neck, I think same thing here as well. So I'll erase, make sure there's a hard line there. I want to make sure that there's a hard line along the collarbone as well. And then I can add my final shading. Now in doing things like this, I hold the brush lightly and just kind of flick it across like that in areas like you see here in the neck. I want to get those creases and I don't want the strokes to be too broad. We'll get into the nitty-gritties of that later in terms of adding detail, but you can start to make sure that there's room for detail before when you're doing the broad strokes. You know, you don't want to get too picky, but yeah, the majority of it is broad, but there will be areas such as behind the nose, under the lip, in the neck, where you will need some extra detail. Okay, so I have my basics done, and I can test that out by hiding my line work. And I know it's barely there anyway, but when I hide it, you can see that I've created the basic form of the shade. It's starting to take shape. Now the next thing I like to do is work in more shade. So I go in here, select a darker brown, put that in my palette. I zoom in now, and I bring my brush to a smaller size, and I get to be much more finicky. So I'll bring that line work up so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to add another layer and clip mask it, okay, because I have my basic dark shade, and I'm going to add another extra dark shade, and it's going to be on its own layer so I can edit them separately. Make sure to do this, because as soon as you start painting lights and shades together, you really can't edit them after you've placed them. So make sure that they have their own layers. So in a similar way, I'm going through and I'm placing my darker colors. This time I'm a little more conservative. It's at a lower alpha, so it's at 8%. It does show easier because it's dark, but I'm just using it minimally and in smaller areas now. So earlier on, I'd shade half the face, and now I'm just kind of starting to do small strokes and work in the shade in areas where it's much smaller. So in here, and things like the brow being furrowed, things like the age marks under the eyes, and the cheekbone. Okay, don't be afraid to get nice and heavy with wrinkles when you're working with old people. I did a tutorial on that, by the way, so if you're interested in seeing a few tips on drawing wrinkles in old people, you can check that out. I'm nearly done with this, so I'm just kind of adding a few extra refinement bits. I want to start doing the edges of this vein, which I want to show. I kind of picture this dude as being something of like a Norse warrior, I guess. All right, so that's my next level of shading. Pretty much done. Okay, so I'm gonna, whoops, I forgot the mouth. All right, I'm just starting to add more. Now when I zoom out and hide my line work, I can hide and show again that extra layer of shading that I've done, and you can see it's starting to add a bit more depth to it. Next bit is similar. I create another clipping mask layer. I select my highlight color that I placed before. I bring my brush up closer to what it was when I started shading the darker parts, but this time we're doing the lighter parts. So out here in the open areas where the light would reflect freely, we want to open up those areas. So along these creases, on the cheekbones, on the nose, everything that sticks out. Okay, and you can see very quickly as soon as you start mixing the layers, so once you get your shading down, it'll still look quite dark, but once you start adding your highlights, you'll be like, wow, this is transformed. Now, be prepared for your picture to look ugly while you're working on it. My art teacher in high school always told me that it's around the middle of the painting process where the entire thing just looks horrific. So, I mean, you look at it now, it's like this weird green bearded guy, and, you know, there's not really much dimension to it yet. But we get past that and we ignore it and we just focus on the task that we're doing. Okay, so that is the main area of the face. I'll just quickly add my highlights to the lower part, but there's less light reflected here than on the face, so there's not as much focus here. Oh, I do take that back because I need to make sure that I have highlights along the vein line. So I'm going to bring my brush size down and do that. Because the vein's fairly small, I want to make sure that I have detail enough to show that it's a vein. There we go. Cool. So very quickly, in the space of 5 to 10 minutes, I've already created the beginnings of the shading of the face. Now, the next thing that I like to do is I select my shading layers and I begin to erase the edges to create backlight to the image. So I'm zooming in here. This is, as some of you know, one of my favorite little tricks. So I'll hide the other highlight and shadow layers. I'll just go through here and erase the edge of the shading I created. I won't erase it in here under the eye because it needs to be shaded. Bring it around like this. And I'll do that for areas which are on an edge where light would reflect on it. So bring the brush size down, do it along here on the cheekbone. It's really hard to get a nice smooth line, so you just want to make sure it turns out well. Here. Okay, so here it's a bit chunky at the end. I want to hit R and kind of fade that out like that. That just kind of smudges it. Okay, then back to my eraser. Erase the edge of the nose. Edge of the ear. Edge of the neck. And this just creates a little bit of dimension around the character. Okay, next layer of shade, same thing. I just want to make sure that on both layers they show off the highlight. You'll see in the final context how cool this is, especially when you add lighting effects, which is a separate video, but on the same set of tutorials. Adding lighting effects, like let's say adding a yellow backlight and making sure those edges are yellow, just is really cool. All right, so I'll zoom out. And there we go, I've got my edging added. Now I select my highlight layer, go into that, make sure I've got my highlight color selected, and I'm just gonna, with a smaller brush, but a higher opacity, go over the very edge and add a highlight. Now I don't wanna cover the whole thing, I just wanna go to the very edge so that half of this highlight area is a much more highlighted edge, and that's on the very outside, and then the other half is the flat color that creates the hard line against the skin. And there we are, I've finished adding my extra little highlights to the edges. Now if I hide my other layers and keep my skin, you can see right there that on its own, it's got a lot of dimension to it. Now I've kind of been rushing through this because this is, you know, a bit of a quickie sort of tutorial, but in adding those extra details in the shading and beginning to refine, we get a nice clearer shape. Now what I'm going to do now, before I move on to the other parts of this character, is find where I need sharp detail and add that, and make sure I'm zoomed in. So one of these places would be under the eyes. So I'm going to go into my first layer of shade, find my dark thing, not good with words, and start to outline and shade how I want this to show. Oops, I don't want it to show like that. I want them to clump together a bit more down the bottom. Okay, and I'll do the same thing on the other side, and same thing on the other layers. So the eyes are a particular area where I want to focus on the detail, the skin around the eyes at least. I'm going to have a separate part of this tutorial where I go into painting the eyes themselves. Okay, next I'm going to go into my highlights layer, select my highlight color, and just bring out the areas that aren't in shadow or in shade. So we can see between these two shadow lines, it's a really thin area to highlight. Then when I hide my line work and zoom out, you can see that it's added a lot of little detail. Now I'd like extra detail in the ear and on this neck vein, and maybe a little on the nose. So I'm going to go through those now and just add a bit more detail. Okay, so I've got the basics of the skin completely finished now. For the next part, I'm going to do the exact same thing with the shirt and the hair, but I'll fast forward the process and you'll be able to see that it's exactly the same. So the same process, I add one layer of a darkish shade and do a broad sort of shading, then another layer of a more concentrated, darker shade in more select areas, then erasing to make sure that I have the edge rim, and then doing highlights. With the hair, I'm not going to be going into too much detail painting it because I'm going to do a separate tutorial on painting detailed hair after this. And mission accomplished. So I have here the roughly shaded picture so far. I'll go through this layer by layer. Now we've seen the skin layer. It's got a basic shadow layer, then on top of that a more concentrated detail one, and then on top of that highlights. Next we have the shirt, done in the exact same way. So I have my base color with a basic shadow layer. Now I wanted to add some little creases here and there, so I just kind of worked around them with the shading and the highlights. But the actual image of the shirt itself is really simple, so I don't really need to go into much more than that. Next I have other, which is the eyes, above that hair. So hair is done similarly, so with the flat base, a broad dark shadow thing, then a more refined shadow. So you can see how the refined shadow just kind of adds to the edges. Then on top of that, the highlights. Now I'm not going to go into hair anymore in this tutorial because in the next tutorial I'm going to be covering painting the hair. So thanks for watching. Make sure to check out the rest of the video tutorial series on painting in Photoshop, and we'll move on to the next part of it.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoy my videos. You can download the reference files from this tutorial by clicking the link in the description. And remember to share any art, animation or game you make on Newgrounds.com. Until next time, see you later.